So I'd like to say, first of all, that the important question when we speak of the role of women, the place that women have in the society, in the struggle on a global level, is the fact that women have been and are, continue to be the main first subject of reproductive work. They are basically those who are most engaged in the reproduction day to day of our life. And at the same time, there are also those who are in the process of reproducing people's lives. They are also reproducing the workforce. They are reproducing people's capacity to work. So in fact, they have a primary role in the process also of capitalist accumulation. The unpaid labor that women do on a day-to-day basis, on a domestic basis, is the work, is the engine that keeps every other form of work, going. So women who often have been seen by the organization, working class organization of the left, as kind of marginal subject, because they have always privileged the work of the primarily male wage laborer as contributor to capitalist accumulation, but also as the exploited subject, but also the revolutionary subject. In reality, and this is a lesson that has come from the feminist movement, in reality women have been fundamental, with in the process both of capitalist accumulation and I think fundamental now in the process of struggle against capital accumulation. So of course, for me, much of my inspiration and in my own struggle has really come from looking at basically the struggle that women have been making historically in the past. So my work, my writings has been very much inspired by the struggle, and also my own activism. And today, that perspective that I was enunciating before has been the perspective that I brought to understand the transformation that are taking place in the global economy, the restructuring of the global economy, and seeing that much of the restructuring as center of the restructuring of reproductive work that has tried to respond precisely to the struggle that women have made. Well, very important, because rural women, in fact, from a point, this is what I presented is a very general understanding, of the role of women. But obviously there are important differences because the case of rural women, and I make reference, for instance, to Africa or to Latin America. Women in Africa, particularly rural women, are the ones who have struggled most to maintain and expand a non-commercial form of agriculture. Today, rural women are the main subsistence farmer in the world. For example, in Africa, 70% or more of African rural women are engaged in subsistence work, as well as, or in many cases, also they are engaged in agriculture for commodity production, for the market, because more and more they are facing an attack coming from the World Bank and from other international organizations, that are trying to really foreclose all those areas of subsistence production. This is really now, and that's why, for instance, organizations like the World Bank, have really targeted, rural women because they see in them really a threat, precisely because of this commitment, to subsistence. And we see that in many cases, rural women have been expropriated, who have been made landless. By the way, women across in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, and I want to come back to it. I'm very much engaged in a struggle to defend communal forms of property, right? To defend what we call the natural commons. But very often, when women have been forced to urbanize, they carry on the struggle also in the urban centers.
Really?
In Africa, much of the urban farming has been done by women, who have taken over. Once they've been urbanized, they began to take over any piece of public land that is not being used, and they've begun to plant things. And in fact, some people have mentioned that women in Africa are breaking down the historical separation between country and town, because they are actually bringing the farming to the town. And we see, for instance, in the United States, that in the United States too, the habit, the practice of the urban commons, the urban gardens, which now is really expanding. Any city that you go, you find urban gardens, have been planted, that practice primarily by immigrant women. In the United States, immigrant women from Africa and from the Caribbean islands, as well as from the south of the United States, so that they have been spent in a completely different environment, and they began to take over any vacant lot, and clean it up, and they have transformed those, and they began to plant food. And we have seen that those activities have begun to create new forms of sociality, not only new forms of food production, but also new forms of sociality. So in fact, I would say that the activities of rural women, the rural women coming from different parts of the world, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean island, have in fact had a tremendous impact, on the struggle that are being carried on, not only in these regions of the world, but also in Europe, in the United States, in the so-called industrialized countries through the process of immigration. And today, rural women are in fact the main organizers of struggle against the destruction of the commons. In so many ways, they are struggling for the maintenance, for instance, of forests, right, that are against logging. Vandana Shiva speaks a lot about it. They are struggling against the contamination of rivers. There is a Mexican woman, Mina Navarro, has just published a beautiful accounts of the struggle the women in Mexico, particularly women in the indigenous community, are making, for the protection of these commons. They're struggling against the dams in India, which are flooding, so many lands. Again, they are important accounts. So I think that this is very important in the rural women, and of course they are also very much involved in a struggle for the reappropriation of land, reclamation of land, in landless people movement for squatting land. Women have had a major role in the MST. In many cases, they were the first to fight and to confront the police when the army was beginning to attack the squatters. Often the women and the children went there because they, and also they were instrumental to make sure that once the land was reappropriated, once they were able to say, okay, this is our land that we share, the kind of housing they were organized, the villages they were organized, would be organized in a common way. Not, for example, organized in a way that divided people once the land had been obtained, one farm here, one farm there, but they will be organized communally because, as they said, I spoke with a number of women from the MST, and they would say at a conference at one point, and they would say that this is because we want to be able to continue to cooperate in the process of reproduction in the way we did during the struggle. Because the struggle forced us to cooperate about the care of the children, about the cleaning, all these processes. And sometimes the men too participated. And we want to be able to continue that. And they struggle precisely to continue that cooperation which transformed the process of reproduction. And we also want to be able to have the kind of commons in the way we organize our housing that allow us to give support to each other so that if we are being abused, we can help each other. We can struggle against violence in the family, in the community. So again, for us, it's been a great inspiration. El Banco Mundial, me refiero en manera particular al África. El Banco Mundial por muchos años empezó cercaba de privatizar la tierra, ¿no? De poner fines, de terminar con la forma de propiedad comunal que ancora estaban en África, como en muchas partes de la América Latina, ¿sí? Pero en África estaba el país donde estaba más difícil por la compañía internacional, por la Banca Mundial, de poder privatizar. Por ejemplo, de poder convencer a la gente de tomar un título individual. Porque muchas gentes decían, yo ho acceso, ¿no? Ya al campo. ¿Por qué debo haber un título? ¿Qué significa haber un título, no? Muchas veces, aunque tomaban el título, que estaba muy caro acquistar un título, aunque ganaban el título, regresaban a la forma de cooperación, a la forma de concepción comunitarias de las tierras, ¿no? Entonces estaba tan difícil por el Banco Mundial que empezaron a crear esta forma ficticia de comunidades, ¿no? Crearon formas de comunidad que estaban comunidades creadas, ¿no? Creadas, populadas de gente local que tenía poder. What is happening now on a global level, but possibly in no place more intensely than Africa, it's really a new wave of enclosure, of land enclosure. And by land, I use the concept of land in a very broad way. I use it in the sense of land including forest, including seas, including rivers. The push towards privatization of lands and forests is so strong today that it's even stronger than in the colonial period. It's really trying to destroy all the victories of the colonial period, you know? And because of that, the land is diminishing. The land available to people, to community, is diminishing. You know, more and more land is being privatized. Now, across the world, you have mining company, you have agribusiness, you have, agrofuel. For example, much land is being privatized in order to grow elephant grass, to be used by agrofuel for la gasolina verde, for la cosiddetta gasolina verde, es la gasolina sucia. Mucha gasolina verde es en realidad gasolina sucia porque es construida sobre el despojo de poblaciones de la América Latina o de la América o del África, ¿no? What is happening is that in this situation where less and less land is available to people, where you have these complicities between local chiefs, local chiefs, local governments, and foreign companies, foreign corporations. What is happening is also that at the local level, many communities, particularly men in the communities, in the commons, are restricting the access the women have to the commons, to the common lands. And they are beginning to say, revising the idea of who belongs to the commons.
Really?
For example, in some African communities, they are beginning to exclude, women who have married into the community because they come from a different group, right? Or they are beginning to exclude also people who have come to a region from other areas, from other ethnic groups. So there is a process of exclusion that is happening in a context where the land is diminishing. And so we see that the action of these international communities, this international organization, is having a very direct impact. And one of the things I've been very interested with in recent years has been how this process of exclusion from the land and land privatization that is now continuing is also instigating new forms of witch hunting, which have reappeared in many parts of the world, and particularly in Africa and in India, in Nepal, and I fear that is also beginning to happen in Latin America. And what I mean by witch hunting, I mean literally the fact that you have a group of people, many times young men, unemployed, but clearly manipulated by people in power, who give them impunity, who begin to accuse women of somebody dies in the community, and then they begin to single out certain women, particularly women who are older, who are living alone, accuse them of being witches, and then attack them and kill them. And many times attack them and kill them in a horrendous way. They really remind the witch hunt of the 16th and 17th century. And I think this is very important, and it's an issue that, in fact, fortunately, more and more women, particularly in India, are beginning to deal with and organize around. But not yet enough, not yet enough. So these institutions have a very great responsibility, very great responsibility in what is happening to women and to land, of course. And I want to mention even also here another form of attack that international financial institutions are carrying on is the microcredit. And there's been a tremendous amount of misinformation about microcredit, because it has been presented as the solution to the question of poverty in the world. And it's really a final solution, but actually it's a solution that undermines, the struggle that many women have made, particularly in response to globalization, particularly in response to structural adjustment and to the austerity program that were imposed on their community. And women have responded to them by trying to create form of subsistence outside of the market.
Really?
For example, taking over land. For example, basically producing a form of, artisanal forms that are exchanged at the community level, and various forms of microactivity, and out of clearly they've seen all this activity, this energy the women have mobilized to continue to feed their communities in situation of extreme poverty and extreme repression. And they've used microcredit to encapsulate, capture all that activity and make it dependent, within monetary relations. And a lot could be said about microcredit, because in fact many of the women who have taken these loans are much more poor today than they were before they took the loan. and many of the support groups that women had and are now groups that have become of reciprocal policing, because microcredit, first of all, all these organizations have insisted on choosing women as the primary recipient because they believe that women are more disciplined and they can be more easily intimidated. In many cases, even when the women take the loan, the men use the money, but it's the woman then who is supposed to work extra to pay back the loan. Secondly, the microcredit is given to a group of women. And because the idea is that if you give it to the group, the members of the group will police each other and ensure that the loan is repaid. So you have a situation where a support group, right? A group of women who often knew each other, they were the neighbor, the friend, the family of now these women are beginning to police each other. And if one cannot pay, then they turn against her, because if you cannot pay, then I have to pay for you. And so you begin to see how microcredit actually undermines the solidarity among women. And that you put you in a position that if you cannot pay back, you're now feeling terrible, because you feel you're jeopardizing not only your own life, you're jeopardizing also the life of the people that you care or were part of your support group. And when women are defaulting, and there is a very, very wrong assumption of the basis of microcredit, which is the idea that all that is necessary to pull people out of poverty is a little amount of money. There's really money, the little amount of money, and that it's a completely false premise.
Really?
Because the reason, which doesn't question why people are poor to begin with. Why poverty? Poverty is not natural. How people have been impoverished. Those impoverished women have been impoverished because they have been expropriated, because they have been subject to exactly the kind of policies that the World Bank, who is supposed to be the savior and is a big, big supporter of microcredit, or the International Monetary Fund, or the World Trade Organization, that these are the policies that these institutions and all these financial institutions, USAID and so on, have imposed on people. They have been the cause. But instead, poverty is assumed as a given. And so we help the poor, never question what is the poor. Actually, that capital, the little loans given to people who are continuously on the verge of disaster, do not solve at all the situation and only make for more indebtedness and make for more misery. And there's also the interest rates are very high, 20 to 30% interest rate on these loans. These are the poorest people in the world, we are told, and they pay the highest interest rate on the loans that are taking. So that already shows how perverse this mechanism is, and it's a mechanism that is really geared to actually make people dependent on the bank. It's a new form of exploitation, except that the exploitation is not seen because the system of debt hides the exploitation, hides the labor that is being extracted. But in that, money is a form of exploitation. In the relationship, what role financial institutions have today in the discipline and exploitation of women, particularly in the rural areas of the world? Tengo dos teorías. Una teoría primera es que en el periodo en lo cual Marx escribía, documentaba el capital, estudiaba la sociedad inglesa, la sociedad industrial, el trabajo de reproducción de la vida y de la fuerza de trabajo estaba muy reducido. Porque en la primera fase de la industrialización, las mujeres fueron introducidas en la fábrica, presque toda la familia obrera trabajaba en la fábrica. Los niños empezaban a trabajar en la fábrica a 4 años. La gran parte de las mujeres trabajaban en las fábricas, en las minas, sobre todo las mujeres jóvenes, pero también las mujeres casadas. No sabemos muy bien que en las ciudades industriales, en Manchester, la condición de la clase obrera estaba una condición terrible, tremenda. Engels la describió muy bien, ¿no? En su libro que examina y describe la situación de la clase obrera, ¿no? Su vivienda, su manera de vivir, de comer, su sanidad. Por ejemplo, sabemos que las mujeres que iban a la fábrica daban a sus niños de bebida que tenían del opio, ¿no? Por hacerlo dormir, porque no podían custodiarlo. Entonces esta es una teoría, que estaba una clase obrera que había gran dificultad a reproducirse, ¿no? Porque la estrategia del capitalismo estaba de reducir al máximo el trabajo de reproducción, ¿no? Esta es una teoría. Efectivamente, Marx en el Capital habla del trabajo doméstico solo 2-3 veces por decir que no estaba, ¿no? Que no estaba. Solamente él habla, por ejemplo, una vez de la situación que se creó en Inglaterra, después de la guerra civil en los Estados Unidos, ¿no? Que cortó la producción de cotón, porque la guerra civil en los Estados Unidos, ¿no? Cortó el exporto de cotón a la industria inglesa. Él dice irónicamente que tomó una guerra civil, una guerra internacional, por hacer que las jóvenes inglesas hicieran un poco de trabajo doméstico, porque no estaban licenciadas, no podían trabajar. Bueno. Pero yo creo que la razón más importante es que Marx tenía una concepción de lo que es el trabajo, el verdadero trabajo, el trabajo industrial, ¿no? Que Marx tenía una concepción que el trabajo importante en el capitalismo, pero trabajo que iba a preparar también la sociedad comunista, estaba el trabajo industrial. Entonces, para Marx, el trabajo que es importante, que cuenta, es el trabajo de la industria, ¿no? Efectivamente, Marx muchas veces repite que es la industria de gran escala, ¿no? Que abre la vía, ¿no? a la construcción de la sociedad comunista. Entonces, en este sentido, el capitalismo es un mal necesario, ¿no? Que es explotación, pero preparación también a un tipo de sociedad que tiene una gran capacidad de trabajo productivo, que expande la capacidad productiva del trabajo. En este sentido, limita o elimina el problema de la escasez. Yo no estoy de acuerdo en ninguna manera con esta visión, pero me digo que Marx no fue capaz de ver, ¿no? La importancia del trabajo de reproducción, incluso el trabajo de procreación, ¿no? Porque tenía su ojo, miraba con su ojo al proceso de la industria, no se pregunta, cuando Marx habla, por ejemplo, de la reproducción a nivel generacional, ¿no? Habla de la procreación como de un hecho natural. Nunca más se preguntó por qué el Estado ha sido siempre tan preocupado con el cuerpo de las mujeres. ¿Por qué ha legislado, ¿no?, el cuerpo de la mujer, la ha controlado, y nunca más ha visto que el problema de la procreación es directamente conectado con el problema de la creación de la fuerza de trabajo, con el problema del mercado del trabajo. Entonces, esta es la mia seconda teoría.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's extremely serious. I think we are in a very, very dangerous historical moment. It's very clear that despite the existence of many struggles across the world, the capitalist class has not been stopped in its drive to, in fact, reduce, expropriate workers, to impose forms of disciplining and exploitation even more intense than what existed, for instance, in the 70s or even the 80s, and this at the international level. And the attack on the, what we call the welfare state. In other words, any form of investment. And when we say investment in, welfare services, in reality was the fact that the state returned in some way some of the wealth that people had produced. And now it's been reduced to a maximum. And in addition, continuous warfare, this system more and more predatory. To me, and ecological destruction. Now, for example, fracking, oil drilling, every part of the world. So mining, it's reaching a point of destruction on international level that is extremely dangerous. So I think on the other side, this is why so many people now are open to hear, to see that we need a change of system. And to me, the popularity of the theme of the commons reflects very much this consciousness that really capitalism is a system that is so fundamentally exploitative of human life, the environment, and so destructive that if it continues this way, we don't know, how long there is life on this earth. Because we see that every day, new forms of life are being destroyed, right? New cultures, languages, environment. So this is a very important moment. It's a moment in which people really have to make decisions, and in a sense, in every activity they engage in. And particularly starting from the process of reproduction, they have to begin to change and create something new, and create forms of existence. And this again the question of the farmers. They give them more power to resist and to, in fact, gain the possibility of contrasting this destructive drive that is now, very visible to all the world, and the capitalism is involved in. Is a response that for the moment is not yet able, except at a local level. In my view, at this moment, we need to do a lot more. I don't see yet a response that is capable to really change the course. Their response is not there yet, but there is a tremendous process of struggle. There is a process of struggle about land reclamation. There is a process of struggle against, for example, reclamation of space, urban space, resisting the fact of being expelled from urban spaces. There is a struggle over housing, over health, over education. So, and I think that what is very important is that there is now this awareness. There is an ecological struggle, an immense amount of ecological struggle. So, but we need to be able to connect the struggles. We need to be able to connect these commons, and we need to be able to approach them in a much more strategic way, with a sense of how, yes, they can give power to each other, how they can begin to create new modes of production, right? New forms of relation and new modes of production, and how they can, in all moments, not only offer new forms of survival, but at the same time begin to construct new forms of resistance.
Really?
Ahora muchos compañeros, compañeras que vienen de la Argentina me dicen que las madres ahora muchas son un poco emburguesidas o que trabajan con el Estado, que no son tan radicales como estaban en el pasado. Es posible, yo no sé suficientemente, ¿no? No sabe, por ejemplo, que el rapporto tenía bien con las mujeres piqueteras, sabía que estaban involucradas. Pero lo que me impresionó mucho de la actividad en los años es sobre todo en la prima fase de la actividad de las madres, ¿no? Que me parece que sea, no simbólico, no, un ejemplo de un proceso que se amplió en toda la América Latina, porque las madres de la Plaza de Mayo no fueron las solas mujeres del hogar que en un momento tan difícil, tan terrible de la historia de la Argentina, cuando la población debía confrontarse con el terror del Estado, un terror sin precedentes, y debía confrontarse también con un programa tremendo de austeridad, que fueron las cuales se movilizaron y empezaron a romper el silencio, el tejido de miedo que paralizaba muchos hombres, que paralizaba muchas comunidades. Hemos visto que el mismo proceso se cumplió en el Chile después del golpe de Pinochet, cuando también estaba un gran miedo y un gran subitáneo empobrecimiento. Fueron las mujeres que como esposa, como madres, como hermanas, se movilizaron por aprovechar medidas de sustentamiento y también empezaron a romper, ¿no? Porque habían el coraje de unirse en un momento en que estaba prohibido unirse. Si te veían dos personas, te desaparecían, pero con los niños, naturalmente porque el sistema estaba también misógino y pensaba que las mujeres no podían poner un peligro al sistema, pero fueron las primeras que se movilizaron, empezando a organizarse sobre el territorio de la reproducción, ¿no? Con los comedores populares, con las alfileras, ¿no? Que, ¿cómo se dice? Tú sabes, las alfileras eran ¿cómo se dice? Grupos de mujeres que se reunían por, ¿cómo se dice? Coser, to embroider, sí, hicieron en sus ricamos, hicieron las figuras de los tanks. Not only the comedores populares, no, the popular kitchen, no, which were a very powerful experience, because in all the communities you had 50, 70 women who came together to shop together, to cook together, and they began to talk to each other, to circulate information, knowledge about, but they also created other groups, the same women. For example, to sew, and the alfileras, they embroidered, the repression, images of the repression, the tanks, the forms of torture, and they send abroad their embroidery. They send them abroad. Their books in the United States, they began to tell the world about these kind of activities are activities that transform these women, transform the community. And in fact, they constituted the first element of resistance. When the Chilean government realized what the Comodores were doing, they went with the army to destroy them. They actually destroyed the pots. They said, these are communism. There was a time in Chile when to organize a Comodore Popolare, to cook in the street was considered communism, and the army would come and prevent you, because they realized that this created a whole base of resistance. And in fact, some people believe that these activities of women in Chile were the beginning of the process of confronting the dictatorship. The same was with the mothers. You know, the presence of those women was the first break, right, in the wall of terror. And so in the sense, and I felt that those women put their pain in common. They put their children in common. They created a common. You know, instead of suffering individually, they actually socialized their experience and create something.